Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion from history to the table from the SD Hist Con. And I am so excited to have with me two designers here whose games, especially two players' games, I have loved over the past several years. David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, who are designers of War Chest and also the Undaunted series, which has got a lot of talk over this weekend. So, gentlemen, welcome to the stream.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Big pleasure to be here.
Now, I've talked to you, David, several times, but Trevor, this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to you. And so I just want to let you gush a little bit. I have really loved the games that you and David have worked on: War Chest, Undaunted. They've won awards on our show, Rolling Dice and Taking Names, for Best Squirrely. So thank you for giving us these treasures that I still love playing today.
Oh, thanks. And it's a huge honor to be here. I'm telling you, the Squirrely awards are the ones I'm the most proud
It's
of.
the only one that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I've got, exactly.
And for those that who are listening, if you wouldn't mind, you can use the chat, ask questions. I'm going to just kind of get the discussion going, but if you have questions specifically you want to ask these two gentlemen, please put them there. If there's any technical issues with video, sound, or etc., just pop them in the chat. And even possibly in the Discord channel for SD Hist, this is also happening at right now. And David said he'd be glad to monitor that for me because I've got like 12 other things I'm having to monitor over on this wall over here. So, all right, let's get into it. So the title of this panel is From History to the Table. And this was interesting to me because as I'm starting to get into a lot of more historical games. And I was on with you, David, on Friday night talking about how I'm really just getting into different types of historical games. And I love the idea of having these historical events that come to life on a game table. And it's very interesting to me about what kind of research do you do to be able to get everything that you need, historical facts, events, people, and implement those in a play form and put them on the table. And I've used our show as a platform to get other people into historical games. And I've used your guys' Undaunted series as a great way to kind of jump into this historical games pool because at its core, it's a basic deck building game. If you've played Dominion, etc., you know what a deck builder is. This just has a theme of a World War II theme. So now I'm getting ready to shut up. I'm going to let you guys talk. So I want to start with Undaunted. So when the idea came up, how did it come up? It was like, I want to make a deck building game. Let's do an historical theme on there. Or, hey, I want to make an historical theme game, but make it approachable and make it a deck builder. And I'll just let you two ping pong back and forth if you want.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start us off, I guess, because I was.
It started with you, so that
Yeah.
makes sense.
We'll let Trevor tell the story of the or. No, so it started kind of a fusion of the two of those, Marty, and that's not always the case, but in this instance, it was a really fortuitous timing where I was really just starting to get into gaming. I had only been probably playing board games for a year or two. One of the games I'd played, and the first deck builder I ever played, was A Few Acres of Snow, which is a very, very strange game to introduce you to deck building, right? So unlike, like you said, Dominion or Ascension or something that's very straightforward, it, like Undaunted, its deck building is driving the action on the board, right? And so I really liked that, and I thought, I'd like to try something like that someday. And about the same time is when I moved to the UK, and I was visiting Normandy, and I was visiting the places where my grandfather's unit, the 30th Infantry Division, was. And I just had this idea, hey, I want to make a game about my grandfather's unit. It'll follow along in their footsteps. What can I do to simulate the platoon level action? And I went back to this idea of deck building driving the sort of command and control of the platoon, but having the board, the spatial sort of World War II skirmish theme applied to it. So now that's different, and we can talk about some of the differences and similarities with some of the other games where they come from. But for Undaunted specifically, it was sort of a combination of wanting to have that mechanism into the background with the theme.
Trevor, what you got to add to that? How did you
What
pop
do-
into this? And
Yeah, well, how did I pop in? A very good question. So David had designed the sort of the core of the system, and had the sort of like the basic structure of the two sides and the units, but he hadn't done any of the sort of scenario development, which of course is a big part of the game. And the publisher who we were talking to at the time, who is not Osprey, was very keen for it to be a scenario driven game, and so that's when I came in. So I did some development on the core, like ironed out a few wrinkles here and there, and but most of it was basically working with David to do the scenario development. And it's also worth mentioning, like, so yeah, David and I have now worked on, I don't know, too many games, lots and lots and lots of games, and this was the first one. So this was like, we knew each other because we've been going to the same sort of meetup play testing group, but this was the first game that we started working on. So David said, hey, I need to, I have this game, I'd played it a few times, and he said, I need someone to help me with this. Would you be interested in doing it? And I said, yeah, sure. So I jumped in. I mean, so just full disclosure. So, I mean, I did play when I was younger. I'm a bit of an omnigamer, but I did play quite a few of the old sort of Avalon Hill historical games. So I'm not like, these things aren't foreign to me, but I'm certainly not a historical gamer or a, war gamer, like in the same way that some of the other people who are watching this are, and even in the way that David is. So I came in sort of with a developer hat on, for Undaunted, but what really interested me about it was, I mean, David seemed like a nice enough guy. I mean, I learned my lesson after real quick, but he seemed like a nice enough guy. And just at that stage, we were both early on, and it was just any chance to work on a game, and especially one that it looked interesting to me, because this mashup of deck building and a skirmish game is something that I had an idea for how to mash those two things up, after having seen A Few Acres of Snow as well, but it didn't have the core, the great core idea that David had, which was this idea that the cards in your deck, each card represents the sort of the health or the efficacy of a unit on the board, which was, to my mind, the real stroke of genius in the thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I was keen to jump in and help, and so that's how I got involved.
And I believe for timing purposes, even though the other game that y'all worked on, the non-historical game War Chest, came out before Undaunted, but David, I believe you told me that War Chest was like a offshoot or offspring of the Undaunted, but War Chest just happened to get published first.
Yeah, so that was basically, we did all of the, I mean, so Undaunted started like 2014, right? So it was in some period of design and development until release. That it was released in 2019, so like 5-ish years in the making. And so over that time, it became clear in, like, I think 2017 is when we signed it with Osprey. So it was going to happen, but while that was underway, Trevor had the idea of, like, okay, let's take the DNA of Undaunted, but we're going to strip it down to its core and make this sort of elegant minimalist version of Undaunted, which is where War Chest came from. Mm-hmm. But one thing I want to mention, so talking about Trevor, coming in to do the development work and the design work on the scenarios with me. I often like to say that, like, Trevor took a good game and made it a great game, or maybe it was an okay game and made it a good game, because, and this is what I think is really important to this discussion. So I came at the game from the perspective of, like, I needed to model a U.S. rifle platoon. That's my goal, right? And Trevor came from, like, we need to make a good game. So when you have two people when we have a shared goal, but we're approaching it with different sort of perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. I think in the end, that's what made it successful and popular, right? Is it kind of, neither one of us was willing to sacrifice some of the things we cared most passionately about. Like we had, you know, arguments, if you will, about, well, it has to be 5 riflemen because there's 5 riflemen in the platoon, so there has to be 5 rifleman cards. I mean, come on now. So those are the kinds of discussions we would have. You know, but does that make it a better game? And so that, I think that going back to this idea of, you know, history, it was awesome in the terms that it started us with these built-in constraints. We had this design goal of like, hey, we're going to make this thing about platoons, and these are the scenarios we have to be able to recreate. But at some point, you have to make a decision. Well, ultimately, it still needs to be a good game.
Mm-hmm. For those, again, who are just now joining, I've got David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, who designed the game Undaunted, and we're talking about from history to the table, taking a historical game and making a game out of it. And so you mentioned units, so let's go ahead and start there. So you have a deck building game, you want it based around World War II theme. David, you said, I know that a rifleman platoon has 5. So you obviously started doing some research from, well, what kind of units were available in World War II? How powerful were they? How did they work? So, and you've done several historical games. So if you want to bring in some context from other games of just talking about, here's the research that I did to go into this game, and then maybe Trevor can jump in. It's like, well, great, you've done all this research, but like you said, you got to make a good game out of this. So maybe there's some compromise to where it's like, this isn't exactly historically correct, but it'll be a better game if we tweak it just a tad, but try to keep it as historically accurate as possible.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So let's talk about, you know, let's start with Undaunted, right? So Undaunted Normandy specifically. So, you know, most people are going to play Undaunted, and I've read comments for like, oh, I was commanding my battalion. Well, okay, a battalion has like 1,000 dudes in it, so you weren't commanding your battalion, you know, or my squad or whatever. And so
he's like the grammar police on Twitter, except the historical police.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So most, I don't know, some significant percentage of Undaunted players is never going to get that, like, oh, I'm commander of this rifle platoon, and this is what it's got in it, and you know the numbers are accurate. But if you start peeling back the onion, you'll see, like I said, you know, you have 5. There's a reason you have 5 riflemen. There's a reason that you have a machine gun team that has 3 guys in it, and they're working together. You know, all of this stuff reflects the actual platoon. But I mean, the most obvious example, if I just go down this path, is the game. You have 3 scouts in your squad, 3 scout cars, but there's not 3 scouts. There's actually 2 scouts, right? But the game breaks. It's at a certain point, and so you make these sacrifices. And Trevor, I don't know, maybe you can remember some of those conversations that you and I had.
So I mean, there's 2 that pop in my mind. The first one are the snipers, right? So you know, snipers are almost by definition lone. Okay. Sometimes you have 2 snipers working together, like a spotter and a sniper. But essentially, you have, you know, and in the Undaunted, that in the original version that David brought, there was 1 sniper card, because there was one, and there was a sniper unit on the board, and it had 1 card associated with it. And you know, you could bolster that into your deck, and then you'd have this 1 card. But it was terrible when your sniper got shot, because it's like, it just felt awful. And also, you know, because it was just that 1 card in a deck that is 17, 18, 20 cards sometimes, like, you know, the unit didn't really work that well. And so I had to kind of just, you know, again, this was back when I didn't know Dave very well, so I had to be polite. But it was just a case of like, well, you know, can we make a concession here and just say, you know, sort of wave our hands a little and say it's a group of 3, right? Because it's 3 for a couple reasons. 3 because, as David said, even with 2 cards in the deck, in terms of gameplay, it doesn't really. And 3 is also good because most of the other units in the game, except for the riflemen, have 3, right? So it's 5 or 3. And that is a nod to the sort of learnability of a game, right? Like, the more, obviously there could have been units with 4 cards and some with 6 and some with 2 and whatever, but that's an extra burden to put on people to have to learn that. And so, you know, it's a general game design points, you want to make things as consistent as you can, just to simplify the sort of that learning aspect of it. And so yeah, we had to make a concession there. And a second example is the game has 3 squads in it. So Squad A, Squad B, and Squad C. And Squad C shows up later in the game, and it does allow us to have some more sort of wide open and sort of strategic scenarios in the end. But in the back of my brain, I was, and many times like, do we really need a Squad C? It's a lot of like a lot of material. Again, I'm not a publisher, but just thinking from like, it's a lot of cards and a lot of cardboard just to support like I think we could have delivered something very similar without Squad C. But David was adamant, and probably he was on this case, he was probably right that we, that there are 3 squads. Like you have to have 3 squads, and so there we have, we had 3 squads. So again, you're always making like the creation of a trade-off, exactly, and it's a trade-off between the historical accuracy, gameplay, and like the fact that this is a product that will exist in the real world, and so manufacturing and cost and art budget, right? Because like Squad C, like there's every single soldier is unique, so that's a lot of art for these cards, which are used, but often probably we could have gotten away without them. So it's that sort of stuff that you have to balance, I guess.
And not only units, but you guys, especially with the North Africa release, introduced a lot of vehicles and everything. And in North Africa and Normandy are different. Normandy is the idea of like a bigger scale battle, right? Where
Yeah.
squads and stuff can be replenished. North Africa has the concept. It's like, that's it. Once they're gone because it was a smaller scale battle. So you also had to look at vehicles and terrain, how they manage terrain, and then come up with stats for these cards. So how did you do the research to look at, well, this type of tank should probably have these sort of stats, and this vehicle should probably have this sort of stats, and then make that work within the game so it doesn't break anything or make something too OP?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. So the design for North Africa was interesting because we actually, when we signed Normandy with Osprey, we actually, as part of the same contract, signed North Africa. And so what we didn't have was the benefit of seeing what the community's response to Normandy was before we designed North Africa. We actually finished that design and gave it to Osprey before Normandy was even released. Fortunately, we had the wherewithal to think through, hey, let's add more asymmetry to the game. We wanted to play very different, right? Neither Trevor nor I are interested in reskinning a game and just putting it out with a different name. Like we wanted it to play very differently. And so when we settled on the North Africa theater, we could approach it from a few different ways. And we thought, at least for me, when I think of the North Africa theater during World War II, two things come to mind, like these big desert tank battles or these like small scale commando raids. And I think that we felt that Undaunted was like at the personal level, right? We had all this art that was of the individual guys and stuff, so it seemed to fit better with this idea of commandos. And when we decided, well, do we do the SAS or do we do what it is? It's a long range desert group. Once we settled on that, it made a lot of sense to just have it at the individual guy level. So just like Normandy, all the scenarios are inspired. And I'm very specifically using the word inspired rather than like modeled or based on real scenarios, because they were just inspired, right? Hey, this actually happened. Let's come up with a scenario that kind of evokes that historical idea, but we're not going to be a slave to the actual historical accuracy. I mean, the most obvious thing in North Africa is you've got these long-range desert group commandos. That's fine. That makes sense. But they're fighting a handful of Italians. So we sacrificed, realism there, right? Because it should have been large groups of Italians. But to get back to your actual question about like statting the vehicles, I mean, essentially what our process is we need to achieve a goal, right? So we needed the long range desert group to have these quick, fast vehicles that could go in fast and smash stuff up. And then we needed the Italians to be able to fight back. And so how do we accomplish that? Oh, well, maybe the Italians have a tank. Okay, well, if they have a tank, what kinds of tank could they possibly have, right? And so you start just kind of slowly chipping away at what's our goal? Okay, what can we do to get there? And then we just keep looking until we find, okay, this tank makes sense because this tank is strong enough to pose a threat, but it can be damaged by the relatively light anti-tank weapons that the long-range desert group had access to. And so you just kind of keep looking until you find, the thing that allows you to make the game you want to make.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also just to add to that, one thing that we were working under the constraints of the fact that this was the Undaunted system, right? And so this was the second game in the series, and obviously we wanted to add new elements, and so we had to deviate from the sort of Normandy core, but at the same time it had to be an Undaunted game. And so that when it comes to things like stats or powers or whatever, we had the level of granularity that we had, and we couldn't really get beyond that. So what I mean is that, like, for example, if you look at Normandy, it's like you roll 1 to 4 dice for combat, right? And the defense values go from 4, 5, or 6, right? So those are the sorts of ranges that we could work with. And so you have to just, make, you obviously you want to start from history, and like, once we'd selected the tank that we were interested in, or but we didn't have any more granularity than, is it a 1 or a 2, right? Like that's the level of granularity that you can work at in this particular context. But when you're designing a new game or a new system, then obviously that sort of things you have to decide is how much granularity do we want to incorporate into it? What aspects of the historical context do we want to incorporate and model into the game? And Undaunted is a very abstracted system, and that's intentional because we wanted it to be, as approachable and streamlined and stuff as possible. But that's always one of the decisions that you have to make. And then obviously a follow-up game adds the extra constraints that you've already just made most of those decisions up front. So you have to be cognizant of that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And David, you said you brought Trevor in when you was talking about the idea of scenarios. Now, if people haven't played the Undaunted series, it's really interesting because there's different scenarios that you set up, where you set up the map, and the units that you have access, everything are supposed to simulate somewhat actual events in history.
Mm-hmm.
So when you guys started looking at scenarios, did you just start Googling like what kind of battles happened, during Normandy? What kind of forces were involved against here? What locations had battles? Same thing with North Africa. What kind of research went into the scenarios that you made? And then how did those scenarios end up having to be modified, changed, and everything to work within the context of your game?
Yeah. So for Normandy, it was basically given to us, right? So we knew we needed somewhere around 10-ish scenarios. It wound up being 12. But I told you at the start that it follows my grandfather's unit. So it had to be battles that unit fought in. Now, when I say his unit, I'm talking about at the division level. So much, much, much larger than the platoon, right? And so when we were doing the history, it was basically, let's go look at every single engagement the 30th Infantry Division fought in, and we'll find any instance that we can find that there's a record of some sort of interesting engagement that realistically makes sense from at the platoon level to be involved in. So we're looking for, sort of interesting small scale examples of conflict, at the platoonish level for the 30th Infantry Division. And it needs to be in Normandy, right? So before they get to Belgium and the Netherlands and Germany, etc. And so it just kind of constrained all the opportunities. And so ultimately, I went and visited all the battlefields that are in the game. But generally speaking, and this goes back to what I was saying before, it's a game that's inspired by those, right? And so one of the best examples of that is there's a scenario in Normandy where you're fighting around a town. Now, a platoon, the area that a platoon is actually going to be engaged in at any given point is really actually pretty compact, right? And so in the game, we're doing all this combat all around the town. Well, I mean, there's no way that a platoon is going to be engaged in something that large. So you basically find the scenario, find the history. Okay, cool. They battled for this town, but we'll abstract it out so that the board is more interesting from a gameplay perspective, if that makes sense. So you make some sacrifices there. It was similar for North Africa, right? Once we settled on the long range desert group, it was, let's find every instance we can ever find of them doing some sort of action that's fun to play, right? So there's lots of things they did that were not fun to play. Let's drive across the desert for 2,000 miles. It's not fun.
Or let's sit and watch a highway for like 72 hours straight without sleep. It's like that doesn't sound like much fun. So yeah, this is and that's definitely it. That's we're being very selective in the things which we're presenting, because again, we are designing a game, and obviously we want, it is an homage to the history, and we want to bring that in and let people learn something about the history through the game. But I don't think there's going to be that many people who would be interesting if we had simulated some of this action. Like, it just
But it's like any other medium, right? Because if you read a book or watch a movie or whatever, it's we're not going to take you for a year of action, right, and show you every excruciating detail, right? So it's finding the things that lend themselves well to the game.
And for those again who are watching, we probably got about 20 minutes left. If you have any questions for these guys on any topic, just please throw them on the chat and YouTube, and we'll talk about it. Now, so you guys have been talking about and playing through Reinforcements, the new expansion that's going to be coming out. Tell us a little bit about that. What does this bring? And I think this is a true expansion, right? You need one of the base games in order to play Reinforcements. So what does Reinforcements bring to us gamers, and what kind of research and stuff did you go into bringing those new content? And there's new scenarios and units and everything.
You want to start us off, Trevor?
Yeah. So sure. In terms of content, so there's the sort of high level changes, or not change, the things that it brings. The first thing is it brings in 2 new game modes, right? So I mean, both Undaunted North Africa and Normandy are a 2-player head-to-head game, right? So in this, we wanted to bring in an opportunity for you to play with more people and to play with less people. So for the more people, we created a 2 versus 2 team game. Cool. and then we also added in a solo mode. And this, to be clear, the solo mode was not David and I who designed this. It was the 2 other Davids.
It's Turtsy.
Yeah,
it's Turtsy.
Does this guy make every solo mode? When does this guy sleep?
Well, but this is important. This is important. So it's David Turtsy and David Digby, right? So Turtsy has now, because he's just, he has a group of people that he works with. So so Turtsy came in and came up with the sort of the core structure for the solo game. And then David Digby came and did most of the donkey work of actually, because I mean, it's incredible the amount of detail that the solo mode goes into. This is like a proper solo mode. Like, every scenario has, there are cards for every unit and every scenario. So, well, I mean, there's some overlap, but essentially you'll have this is the AI card for snipers that gets used in scenarios 3, 5, and 9. This is the AI sniper card that gets used for scenarios 6, or did I say 6? 3 other scenarios or whatever. So it's an incredible amount of work. So that's the two key things that it adds, right? So it adds a two game modes. So there's 2 versus 2, a solo mode, and then we've added new content for the 2. So new units for both Normandy and North Africa, and then 4 scenarios for each. So 4 scenarios for North Africa, 4 for Normandy, and the solo mode can be played for all of the old content for Normandy and North Africa, and all of the new stuff, and it works on both sides, right? Wow. So you can play as the Germans, as the Americans, as the LRDG, as the Italians. And yeah, so I mean that's at the high level, that's it. So I mean, David, you want to talk quickly about the bringing in the history?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will say real quick to tack onto what Trevor just said, for the people out there who are solo gamers who just heard what Trevor said, that means there's 62 different ways to play Undaunted solo mode if you have all the content, right? 62 different solo experiences. So it's a little bit mind bending. Yeah. So one of the things that, when I mentioned earlier that we didn't have the benefit when we were designing North Africa to hey, what do people want? And what's interesting is I went back and looked at this. There was enough buzz being generated in the lead up to Undaunted Normandy that Osprey actually came to us and said, hey, we want you to go ahead and make another game, it being reinforcements, another expansion. So they actually had decided that before it was released, but we had the ability to get at least a few months of feedback from players. And one thing that the players wanted, we thought when we were designing Normandy, that between the starting decks being different between the players, the supply being different, the scenarios being very different, we thought there's enough asymmetry in the game, people will be happy. But one of the very first things we heard was, no, in addition to all that asymmetry, we actually want the units to be different too. Now, obviously, North Africa has that in spades, right?
Sure.
But people wanted their toys to be different. So we introduced a couple of things that are thematic, like sort of stereotypically thematic to U.S. and German platoons, right? So the Americans get grenade-mounted rifles, a grenade launcher, and the Germans get submachine gunners. And then we also added tanks to both sides. Now, the tanks are not symmetric, so the Germans get Panzers and Panthers, and the Americans get Shermans and Stuarts. And if you know anything about tanks, you'll know that if one side gets a Panther, one side gets a Stuart, there's some serious disparity here. And so, we needed the tanks to be realistic from the time period, right? So we couldn't just say, well, let's just get 2 roughly equal tanks and we'll throw them in there so we don't have to worry about, balance. Mm-hmm. They needed to be historically accurate. They needed to be realistic on the Western, the Western theater. So we ultimately just, decided on these, and they are very asymmetric. And so we had to choose tanks that were historically logical. We designed them in such a way that they made sense mechanically to the history, which then meant, okay, now it's on us to design scenarios in such a way that allows for us to have the Germans with their better tanks, if you will, right against the Americans. So I just came from a demo where I was demoing the first one, and a guy made that comment. He's like, well, I've got Panthers and Panzers. Let's see how the Stuarts and the Shermans are going to hold up. But as you can imagine in the scenario design, it balances for that. So, I mean, yeah, it's another example of fans want something. They want more asymmetry. They want toys. Okay, cool. That's our constraint. Let's go back and what makes sense from a historical standpoint. Okay, now we've got that answer. Okay, now we've got to model it in the game and make it work from a gameplay perspective, right?
Nice. Now we have about 12 minutes left, and we did get a couple questions, so I want to make sure these get answered before we run out of time. Henry asked, have you considered using this system in a different era of war?
Yeah. Trevor, do you want to talk about this? You want me to?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Different era.
Yeah. Have you considered using this system in a different era?
So, I mean, we have discussed it, and it's certainly something that, it's something that we may do down the line. But yeah, that's pretty much, I think, as far as we've gotten, I think.
I would say, okay, so a few things. So there's been a lot of interest in that. A lot of people have asked about that. There's even a fan-made version of there's even a fan-made version of Vietnam. I will say that there's some eras that I'm not comfortable making, right? So I personally would not be comfortable making like a modern day version of Undaunted, unless it was super abstract, right? Here's the issue, right? From a practical perspective, Osprey is probably going to want to continue to have one Undaunted title per year-ish. Okay. Trevor and I only have a finite amount of design time, right? If they, I think I mentioned this before, I can't remember. We're not really interested in designing something unless it's different, right? We don't want to ever get in a situation where we're just reskinning things, right? So it wants to be different. It has to feel different. It has to still feel like Undaunted. The next couple of years have already been planned out and designed. So, for us to go to a different era, it would either have to be kind of in the future and us have, okay, let's change it up, or maybe come from a different designer and pitch it to Osprey, something like that. But I'm certainly not opposed, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so in historical, I didn't mean to cut you off, Trevor. Just throw this in real quick. Almost like what GMT does with coin, right? So Volca designed a coin system, and look how many designers have taken it and done their own thing with it. And it could be the same thing with you guys. Hey, we have an Undaunted system that Trevor and David designed. Somebody else would come in, oh, this is great. I want to do a Revolutionary War version of this sort of deal.
Yeah. And we've had people, I know, I'm sure Trevor has too. I've had people come to me and they say, hey, I want to do a Undaunted game about XYZ. And I'm like, that's cool. Go to Osprey and pitch it to them, because we can't say yes or no, right? It's up to Osprey ultimately. Yeah. I think it'd be cool to see what other people could come up with, though, using the core system for sure.
Trevor, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, I mean that's pretty much the same as David. I mean, it would be like we'd like to do it. It's just, again, we're under the we only have so much time, but we would, by all means, if people have ideas, then by all means speak to Osprey.
And I'm not obviously privy to any information, but says you guys got this planned out over the next couple of years. So, in my mind, I mean, probably people could think, wow, there haven't been ships yet. There hasn't been the Pacific Theater. There hasn't been airplanes yet. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you guys have probably been playing with. I can't wait to see what happens. Another question came in. Russ asked, have you guys played the solo, and how does it feel compared to playing versus a human opponent?
Go ahead, David.
I have not played the solo. I have,
so
what we basically did is Trevor and I designed reinforcements, everything but the solo system. We designed everything. We delivered it to Osprey. They took that and they gave it to David and said, here, design a solo system for this and everything before it. And so they went off and did all that work. They would, every once in a while, we'd hear from Osprey about, hey, this is what's going on. And it was just kind of like, cool. I mean, we basically, when I say we, I mean me, Trevor, and Osprey decided we were going to do a solo system for Undaunted, we told them, hey, we're not interested in doing it, right? If I'm going to design something solo, I want it to be solo from the start, right? And so once we said, hey, let them do it, we just let them do it. I've seen Paul Grogan has played it. He's done a playthrough solo. So I watched that to get a sense for it. I've read the rules. I've seen the cards. I will say that I personally think it does a good job of evoking the experience of a two-player game. There's a bit of crunch to it there, as there are with any kind of AI. But I think once you've played it a few times and kind of got this is the general AI approach, I think it'll click pretty easily.
And so the last few minutes, again, for those who are watching, we're talking about from history to the table, about taking historical events and bringing them to the table. And maybe this is directed more towards David. David, I know you've designed several historical games like Pavlov's House. I'm looking at your whole list here, soldiers and postmen's uniforms. So just out of curiosity, in some games like that, is that one of those things where there was this historical event that you read about? It's like, man, that would be cool to see simulated in a game form. or did you have an idea from a game? It's like, what in history would kind of fit this? So you could take either those, both of those other ones, and just could you tell us how that works?
Yeah, those are very different, right? So I was very specific about using the word inspired for Undaunted. That's a very different thing. So in each of those cases, honestly, it's usually about 6 months to a year of research.
Wow.
Before the game design starts. I did a demo yesterday of Lanzareth Bridge, which is the 4th part in that series, the Valiant Defense series. And this wasn't the intent, but it kind of turned into just a question and answer session about some of the rules. And I would teach a rule, and I would say, okay, the reason that this rule is like this is because this is what actually happened historically. So literally, like every single element of the game was derived from a historical thing, right? Whether it's moving ammunition from a machine gun, or why does this, whatever it is, any aspect of the game ties back to some historical thing. And so what that usually looks like is I'll do the research. Cool. I get a feel for the historical event. Then I'll reread everything and I'll note, okay, this is a thing that can be modeled. This can be modeled, etc. I'll kind of settle, like, these are the things that I want the player of the game to take away. Like, I think you've got Soldiers and Postmen's uniforms now, right? You've got a copy of it.
Got it.
So when you play it, I want you to think, I can't win, right? We're not going to be able to. We're never going to be successful. We just got to hold out.
Well, that sounds like a great way to start a game,
super
David.
Fun, super fun.
Why am I playing this? Because I can't win.
Yeah. I desperately want my non-combatants to live, right? Like there's a janitor and his wife and their little girl. I do not want those people to die at all costs. If I can, I want to try to let people escape. Like, there's some things that you as a player are going to want to do, right, passionately, and that ties back to what the feel of the hit being there, in the actual historical event, right? So it's a very different goal. It really does come down to like modeling, trying to model an experience or a feeling rather than just a general inspiration for an idea.
Gotcha.
For a game idea.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because yesterday I played my first very short game of Nesky from Volca with Ignacy from Portal. Whew, that was a mouthful. And so as we played through a couple of short scenarios, and I had some questions for Volca, and he said, DM me and I'll answer them. And one of them was Ignacy, who was playing the Teutons, had a stronghold under siege, and it's like, I need to come help. So I brought a Russian unit in there, and I asked Volko, and I said, I didn't understand the rules. I said, can I just battle, then get back into my stronghold? I need to face them once, then hide my stronghold. He went, no. He said, think about this historically. He said, if there's a castle under siege and you bring in forces, you must beat through the siege forces to get into your stronghold. If you feel that you can't, you don't get to retreat into your stronghold. You're on the wrong side of the line. You have to go back from where you came. I went, oh, that makes total sense. Excuse me. And then, of course, references the rules. That's in 4.3.2.5 if you want to go read for yourself. But no, I thought that was really cool. It's like, thematically, I see what you're saying here. I want to make it as close and accurate as possible, which is what Volko did with this. But in Undaunted, it's like, well, we need to make some concessions here.
Yep.
And is the reason for making concessions to make the game more approachable, or did you just feel like making it too historically accurate would be too difficult?
No, in this case, it was definitely for approachability, right? Absolutely. So every single decision that's made about historicity versus approachability, right? That's a question you have to ask yourself. And every game is different. The answer is going to be different based on who the audience is, right? And so Undaunted has a very different audience than Soldiers and Postmen's uniforms, right? And so the decision point is going to be very different.
Okay. Now, with a couple minutes left to go, just let me ask, when is Reinforcements coming out?
November 25th is the release day. So shipping gods be, willing.
Yeah, I was gonna say logistics lords, if they bless it or whatever. So I know you probably can't say anything, but do you know when Osprey is going to be able to say, by the way, after Reinforcements, you can look forward to blah? for
Trevor?
the Undaunted line.
Yeah. So the announcement. Okay. So yeah, David, and we've answered this question before. So if you look back through history, the last few years, and see when Undaunted games come out, they tend to, well, this year's different because
COVID. Yeah.
shit, but generally games come out in the sort of summer, Gen Con to Essen, sort of that sort of time. So yeah, it's been that way for the last 3 years, so we can expect that perhaps to happen. In terms of when the announcement will be, so we expect that there'll be announcement coming sort of early next year.
Okay.
As to what will be coming for the next one.
And the very last thing, do each of you have anything aside from Undaunted that you want to get us excited about? David, I know you have a new Kickstarter that you can talk about. Anything else? And then Trevor. So David, we'll start with you, then jump to Trevor.
Yeah, in the immediate term, you mentioned it already. So, and I talked about it earlier, Lanzareth Ridge, which is the fourth part of the Valiant Defense series. That'll be on Kickstarter next month. That's about, it's like the first day of the Battle of the Bulge. You're taking control of a very small unit there. So yeah, that's my next project.
Okay, Trevor.
Yeah, and for me, so I'm just trying to think. So David and I have a couple things coming out soon. So we have a Dire Alliance Horror, which the Kickstarter happened earlier, and it should be shipping. It should be shipping out to backers soon. So we're really looking forward to seeing that. It's the first miniatures game that Dave and I have ever done, so we're excited to see the little plastic. They look gorgeous. And in terms of new stuff, there isn't actually. I'm just trying to think. There isn't. I mean, there's a few things coming out next year, but nothing, very imminent. So
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
One thing I will mention, and it's a ways off, but it's exciting because we're working on it together with another one of our co-design partners. Is we've got a game coming out called Resist, which is about the Spanish Maquis. So that's a super niche topic. Most people think of the Maquis, they think of the French Maquis during World War II, but there were actually Spanish resistance fighters too. But it's actually not during World War II. The game is focused on their effort to retake Spain against Franco post World War II. And I just want to mention that Trevor and I are working on it with my friend Roger Tankersley, who I designed Sniper Elite with.
Awesome. And who's that going to be coming out from?
So that's actually coming out from a Spanish publisher called Salt and Pepper. So they do localizations. They're mostly known for they do the localizations for Button Shy games. They've done Watergate, etc. They actually reached out to us and asked us to design. I think it's going to be their first non-localization, their first original design.
Awesome.
So they asked us to do something for them, and we thought it'd be cool to have something that tied back to them being a Spanish publisher. So that's why we settled on that.
And if people want to be able to find you online, etc., where can they do so, Trevor?
So Twitter is good. It's at Trevor M Benjamin, and then Board Game Geek as well. So you can just find me on Board Game Geek. It's Trevor M Benjamin as well. And by all means, feel free to shoot me a message.
Awesome. David?
Yeah, same thing. Twitter, it's DJack, JACK Thompson, and on and the other place is Board Game Geek. Probably Twitter's the easiest, quickest.
Gotcha. David, Trevor, it has been a pleasure talking with y'all, and I really do enjoy any games y'all come out with. When I see a game coming out with both your names on it, I'm all over it. This is the first I've heard about this Spanish game that you're talking about. I will be all over that. The miniatures game, I'm excited for that to come out. I can't wait to try it. So thank you so much for taking time in this busy weekend to come and chat with me. And thanks for everybody who watched through this. Make sure to go follow them. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, share it. David, Trevor,